Okay, well, welcome everyone to our Earth Month special virtual event, all about Hoya conservation. We have Amanda here. Thank you, Amanda, for being here with us. Amanda's going to start us off talking about a brief history of Hoyas. Part of conservation is knowing where your Hoyas come from so that you are able to be a more successful grower and collector. And then Amanda's going to talk about Hoya conservation, and then we'll talk about propagation as one of the ways to conserve Hoyas as a genus.
Yay.
All right, take it out, Amanda.
Awesome. So yeah, I first of all I want to thank you, Eve, for putting this together. And Hoya conservation is a big topic, so we think that it's a good it's a good opportunity because April is Earth Month, as you guys know. So it's a good way to like kind of link it together. And as Hoya collectors or hobbyists ourselves, like we should really understand this topic better because we can be directly contributing to Hoya conservation or the opposite. So we're going to talk a little bit about that today. And how old do you think the Hoya genus is my first question. I mean, Hoyas always exist in nature, right? But then, not until actually 1810, it was first published as a genus. So Hoyas is under the Aponaceae family. So it was published by this guy named Robert Brown. It's a very common name. Robert Brown is a Scottish botanist. So he decided that, he found this plant, he wanted to publish that, in the namesake of one of his really good friend who is also a botanist, named Thomas Hoy, and hence Hoya. So that's what most people think or agree that the name Hoya come from. So Hoya, it's it's very widespread in terms of its geographical location. So Southeast Asia, I'm sure you guys heard of like Borneo have a lot, Philippines have a lot, Malaysia, Indonesia, all the way to Australia. So hence Hoya australis, right? So there's so many type of Hoya australis. That's why you always see like Hoya australis SSP, like subspecies something, right? So that's that. Yeah, it can go from like rainforest, a hill forest, or like in the Himalayas. So Hoyas are actually a very diverse genus in terms of where you can find them, and obviously because of where you can find them or where it's native to, as Eve mentioned earlier, there's very different growth environments requirements and also propagation environments that we need to pay attention on if we want to number one, better propagate our Hoyas, and number two, better grow our Hoyas, right? So yeah, Hoya are mostly epiphytic, meaning that they grow on trees and bark. I want to bring this up because it will, be relevant to our later topic in terms of, why conservation of Hoya is a little bit lacking right now, just in the general environment. So yeah, Hoya is epiphytic, so meaning that they climb trees and bark, and there's also some terrestrial species of Hoya. So just to think about a few is Hoya multiflora, for example. Like I'm sure a lot of you guys have that one. It's a more like a basic Hoya. So you can see that they have a more bush-like or shrub-like structure. So those are the Hoyas we consider more as terrestrial instead of epiphytic, which is the one that climb on trees. So the one that climb on trees, you guys have a lot. It's like Hoya, they like to stick out all these tendrils and trying to find things to climb on. So that is like, show that, that is an epiphytic Hoya species. I said briefly earlier, there's a lot of formal or large scale efforts that the Penn Society or the Terpenol put in to conserve Hoya. So I know there's more for like, for example, aroids, right? However, Hoyas, for whatever reason, we don't. We know that there is like a lot of local efforts. For example, like I know Philippines have a conservation group for Hoyas. Queensland from Australia, they also have a conservation group for that. But in terms of like a international, one, we don't have that. So Hoya, a lot of Hoyas are actually in danger for multiple reasons. So it's actually kind of like a double whammy. So for one, we have poacher, right? Poachers, basically, they just go to the forest or even national park or even someone's backyard or garden, like to rip the Hoyas out and then they sell it for like a ridiculous price. I'm sure you guys all remember a few months ago. Time is a blur now. But when the pandemic was it at a height, you know, there's a price increase in the Hoya market, and there's a lot of time that, you know, we heard, oh, you know, someone booked into the park or someone booked into the botanical garden and still this like, you know, Hoyas and trying to like sell it with like a ridiculous price. So that's number one, poacher, right? And number two is it's kind of not related to poaching. So we are experiencing a lot of deforestation, right? In the Amazon or, you know, different part of the world. And remember we said earlier that Hoyas are epiphytic. So they grow on tree or in tree. So what happened is, you know, when they cut the tree down, the Hoya kind of lost its home and it just, you know, fell off the tree and it's died. And unfortunately, a lot of the new species was actually discovered that way. Like, you know, the botanists walk by and say, oh yeah, there's this plant in there. Oh, it's a Hoya. Oh my God, it's a new species. So that is a good thing, but it's also a really bad thing because, you know, a lot of the Hoyas are, you know, in danger because of that. So yeah, so that's basically some of the background about like, you know, where Hoyas come from and why, you know, conservation of Hoyas is difficult or lacking. And now we can move on to the important part. Is like we know this is the fact. There's a fact that, or there's a problem here. So how can we solve it? So as a lot of us are collectors or hobbyists, you know, what we can do is, you know, we can try to propagate them. You know, we can share them, right? Or we can just make sure that we know our source. So there's a couple really not famous, I guess famous, experienced Hoya collectors out there. You know, for example, like there's Dale Comerber. I think he is based in Berkeley, California. And there's Dan Green and Dorothy Green, which we interview actually. They are based in Hawaii. And then there's Carol Lowell from Florida. There's Rick Moria from Florida. So those are a lot of the more experienced collectors. You know, they grow the Hoyas, they propagate them. You know, they will sell them or share them, right? So that's one thing that they're doing right now. And the other thing is like make sure that, you know, when we are purchasing Hoya, you know, we are actually buying from a reputable seller. One of the questions that I got like a lot is, where did you get your Hoya from? Because it's harder for us to get like some more special Hoyas in the United States. Sometimes we have to go overseas, right? And that's when the problem happen is, okay, it's overseas. I don't know this person, and I don't know if I should get the Hoyas from them. And I'm sure you guys have seen posts on Facebook that, oh, I pay this person from Indonesia, Malaysia, or whatever country that you know the sellers from, and it's end up either they don't get their plant, they didn't get their plants, or they get like semi-dead Hoyas. Or I even saw a picture that is look like, okay, this Hoya look like it just get ripped off from a tree and ship it over here. So that's why it's important for us to really like know who are we buying to. I know it's extremely tempting for us to see a Hoya, whatever unicorn species that you guys think of. I don't want to put a name here because different people have different definition of like, oh, this is a unicorn or this is not, right? So yeah, so just make sure that, you know, you guys pay attention, on that. Make sure you file with the seller. I personally, it's no secret, I share it many times. I personally really like Hoya from Thailand. They are really reputable. They have been in business for a long time. I spoke with the owners before, you know, in person, well, not in person, but like, you know, via like a video call. And, you know, they're genuine and they have a really good, you know, reputation even within the whole like Hoyas community. So yeah, so I think if you guys want to try to, you know, import Hoya in a legally in a safe way, so you know, try our Hoya. So yeah, so that would be a couple of things that, you know, we can do, you know, in terms of knowing our source. The other thing I mentioned earlier is like propagation. So, you know, if you have a really beautiful Hoyas, right, what you can do is you can cut it, root it, and share it, right? So that way, you know, we all get beautiful Hoyas safely and legally. So that is what I'm trying to say. So yeah, so I know that today we're gonna talk about you know, just like a refresher. I'm not gonna go into details, but more like a refresher of like how I personally propagate Hoya. So I don't want to make it like, okay, this is the right way, because this is just what worked in my environment. So, you know, different things may work in your environment. So if you have any comment or If you have any question or if you have any best practice that works better for you, feel free to leave in the chat or in the comment. So yeah, so Eve is very nicely to take out this slides that I prepared like a while ago. You know, it was supposed to be a Hoya, it was a Hoya's propagation workshop, but you know, today we're not going to go into detail. We can just basically really go through it, right? So yeah, we talk about how to maximize your success rate when propagating Hoya. So this is a term that I still love a lot. It's roots or rot. It's not my own term. It's from Leslie Harlick, which is a very experienced Hoya culturist. So your goal is to root your Hoyas before it's rot, right? So you understand that, you know, if your Hoya doesn't root, right, eventually if you live in water or moss or whatever propagation medium you use, it's going to eventually, you know, rot, and then you have to throw the cutting away. So it's like a game of speed. And that's why it's important for us to understand the requirement to root your Hoya as fast as possible. So yeah, like I mentioned earlier, there's no a one-size-fits-all method. Like I said, I'm going to share my best practice with you, but then you have a different environment, right? You have a different plant parent habits, or even the species itself, you know, can require really different growing or propagation environments. So we'll discuss that. All right, so first thing you want to do is you want to cut your Hoyas, right? So you see this picture is a Hoya polylura that I have. I mean, I rooted, and I can show you like the mother plant right here if you're interested. So this is the mother plant. This poor thing, I stick it so many times. It should be about like 3 times bigger. That's how big it is right now. So this is my Hoya polylura. So like I said, right, you know, you want to sanitize your seed, make sure that you're not transporting germs and, you know, nasty stuff, you know, to your cuttings, and pick a healthy session. And I also recommend to do it like early in the day, just because you know, that's when the plants tend to be more pumpy and more healthy. So that way, you know, it's high, it's in greater chance for your Hoyas to roots, right? Cut 2 to 3 nodes, not too many, because you don't want to burden the plants. And also leave a cushion. So as you can see in the picture, right, I leave about like 1 inch or so, just in case if, you know, the cutting start to rot, I can like have cushion that I can cut back. And last but not least is make sure that you let it colors, meaning that, you know, you can just leave it out in the air for like, I don't know, a few hours until those sap that you will see very often in your Hoya cuttings when it dried out. So that would be taking and cutting. So when you're propagating Hoya, like when you're rooting Hoya, there's different requirements or key factors in comparison when you're growing Hoya. So here, right, we talk about humidity and moisture. Like you gotta give it like a little bit more moisture when you want to root your Hoya. You also want to slightly increase the temperature, right, in comparison to your regular growing environment. And last but not least is airflow, because you don't want your cutting to rot. And in this formula, light is kind of a little bit less important when you're rooting Hoya. So you can see like there's a picture of my Clemenceorum that I root in Mecca. So you see the roots is very healthy and green and white. Well, you don't need any of this, but if you have it, it would definitely help with your chance of success and also rate of you know, the Hoya to propagate. So as you can see from the far left side, it's propagation box, right? It's help with like keeping the moisture and the humidity in, right? And then you have heat mat. So heat mat is very useful just because, you know, we can really control like the temperature of the specific environment, right? Like of like where I put my Hoya propagation. So heat mat is a great way to actually do that for you. Because if Hoya require a higher temperature to be propagated, you don't want to turn on your heater for the whole house, right? For example. And then you can add a fan just for airflow, so to prevent rotting. And then last but not least is this is like a small like greenhouse. I had one, I don't use one anymore. I had one, and it's a great way to also like keeping the moisture, keeping the heat, and just, you know, centralize all your propagation as well. Oh, medium. Nice. Okay, so medium wise, right? So there's many different mediums, and like I said earlier, it really depends on your home environment, right? So and what you're comfortable with and what your plant parenting style, right? So long fiber speculum moss, you know, the pros is like, yeah, it does retain more moisture. It's root fast, right? However, sometimes it can retain too much moisture because long fiber speculum moss, when you soak it, Like it can absorb like up to 8 times of water, in comparison to its body weight. And the other thing that what bugs me the more about long fiber spider moss is like when you're about to, when you're cutting roots and you want to remove all the moss, it's very difficult to remove all of them. So that's kind of the pros and cons here. And the other thing I want to bring up about spider moss is like the roots kind of form a little bit weaker when you propagate in spider moss. It's just because, it's a softer material, so it's easier for the root to push through. It doesn't have to grow so big and strong. And that's why the roots tend to be a little bit weaker, although they do form faster. Cocoa coir, it's a good one as well. Oh, actually, since I have it here, this is a Hoya serpent that I root in long fiber sphagnum moss, as you can see. I mean, it's basically live here now because I failed to remove the moss. And that's exactly what I was talking about. It's difficult to remove. So yeah, so that's long fiber sphagnum moss. And then next we're gonna talk about cocoa coir. So cocoa coir is a good how do you say it? A good step away from sphagnum moss, just because it does have better moisture control, and then it allows your cutting to grow stronger roots because it's a little bit harder, so the root kind of had to work harder and push through. Again, the cons is it was slower, and it's also very, very hard to remove. I have another example here. Is I showed you my polylure before, but this is what cocoa coir look like. So yeah, so it's grow, like, it's fine, and as you can see, like the roots even like growing from the bottom now. So yeah, so that's cocoa coir. However, it's staying cocoa coir because I cannot remove it completely, so it's live here now. So we can go to the next one. Okay, so this is a hot one. I don't know if it's still a hot one because there's always new medium coming in the market. But this is at least the one that, to me, it's newer. It's the Chusapon, right? So according to the company, who produces Chusapon, the pro is it have a really good air and water ratio, like 45% to 55%. And it's also inorganic, so it's actually reduced the chance of disease. And the con is it's dry out faster. So I know some people, they do put like a reservoir under the Chusapon, and some people, just kind of like make sure that it's wet thoroughly before they start, their cutting. I think either ways is fine. I did have the Chusapon, I did use the Chusapon to root my plants. It does root a little bit slower, just like cocoa coir, because the plant have to kind of push through like a harder medium. But I have to say that after the plant is root, you can just let it live in the Chusapon, so you don't have to go through that transition period. So next we talk about like lacquer and perlite. So now I'll be honest with you, these two are the ones that I prefer. I don't prefer as much, just because of how fast it's dry out. Like I said, right? You have to look at your plant parenting style. I am a lazy plant parent. I'm super lazy, meaning that sometimes I just forgot to check my lacquer, or sometimes I forgot to check my perlite, and it is completely dry out. And remember we talked about one of the most important things for your Hoyas to root is moisture. So because it's dry out, the tiny root that just started to form dies, and then you have to start over again. So I do not like it. However, on the flip side, yes, because it's dry out a little bit faster, it's meaning that it's also reduce the chance of rot, and then you can also remove it really easily. So just like the Chusapon, right? If you do root your plant in lacquer or perlite, you can just basically leave it in there as long as you remember to water it. I did hear people say that, I didn't try myself, but I did hear people say that when you root something in perlite, the roots would deform. So I haven't had experience with that. So, but if you guys have experience with that, or if you guys have any opinion in it, make sure you leave in the chat or in the comment. Yep. So that's a quick rundown on propagation. So the reason we went over propagation is just because, like we said, other than knowing where you buy your Hoyas from, to better conserve the Hoya, right? The genus of Hoyas. The other way is, as hobbyists, right? If we get a plant, we can propagate it and share it. So that's also a great way to, like, to conserve the species Hoyas, right? Because if we all have Hoyas, we all share Hoyas, right? Then the market will not be as hard, meaning that, the poacher or whoever that is will not have as much of an incentive, you know, to go into the forest and literally just like rip the Hoyas down and, you know, kill it. So, yep, that's all I
Oh,
have for you. Yeah, sorry. Did I
no,
miss
thanks.
something?
No, I was going to say thanks, Amanda. One thing we forgot to mention were you had two examples of
Oh, yeah.
Hoyas that you were going to show that to explain the reason why it's important to know where your Hoyas come from. So it's better for you to take care of it if you know where they come from. I think one was Polynura and the other
Yeah.
one was Chuiorum.
Yeah. I can give a couple examples. Chewy. I know that's what people call it, chewy, Hoya chewy, because it's hard to pronounce. But yeah, no, like to each point is like, yeah. If you want to successfully propagate your Hoyas or just grow your Hoyas, you have to know where your Hoyas come from. And that's why we talked briefly about, you know, how diverse the Hoya geographical location is. So yeah, so we'll talk about my favorite is Hoya polydura first. So now Hoya polydura actually come from the Himalayas. You can find it in the Himalaya or you can find it in northeast Yunnan. So it makes sense because if you look at the plant itself, right, it's grow the best in cooler environments. And if you want Hoya polydura to flower, you kind of have to create a temperature difference between the light and day because, you know, in high altitude, that's kind of where the environments come from. And it's also like a little bit more moisture, meaning that if you overwater it for once or twice, not constantly, it's not going to just die on you right away, like for example, for Propagation, which is like, you know, not a, you know, high altitude species of Hoya. So yeah, so this is one of the example why, you know, people will ask, oh, why is my Hoya polydura dying? Why is it not flowering? Or why the leaf yellowing? And you will have to think about like, okay, this is where it's come from. This is the environment it's native to. And I am not creating that environment in my house, and that's why it's dying. So that's one example. And the other example is Hoya chuiorum, or you can call it chewy. So Hoya chuiorum is a species that grow in forest hill, right? So as you can see, it is one of the more like terrestrial species of Hoya because they have this more bush-like or like shrub-like structure instead of like the winding or tendril type of Hoya. So yeah, Hoya is Hoya chuiorum because of its you can look at this morphology, like it have a thinner leaves. So it's mean that like it also and also it's because it's grown on the forest floor, meaning that, you know, there is like probably tree canopy and whatnot covering it. So if you're giving it too much light, it will bleach the leaf. And I actually, this is an actual question I got from one of my from my YouTube you know, from my YouTube channel, is people say, oh yeah, why is your tree worm so dark green and so healthy? Mine is like all yellowing and lime green. And then when he sent me the picture of his actual home environment, which is like an outside patio with a lot of south-facing sun, then I, at that point, you know, just tell him that, okay, maybe you have too much light for your Hoya tree worm because that's just not what the plants are used to in this native environment. So yeah, so these are just like two examples that I can give you, like, you know, why do you have to consider where the Hoya come from in order to better grow it and, you know, propagate it. So.
Thanks, Amanda. Okay, so we're now going to take some questions. Does anyone have any questions about Hoyas, conservation, propagation before we go to the contest part of this event?
Question.
Go ahead, Shen. Is it Shen or Sen?
Hi, Sen.
Sen, okay.
Hi.
Hi.
So my question was about, you know, Hoyas and temperature. So I know that certain Hoyas like cooler temps than warmer ones. And I was wondering how that would affect propagation, because I know that for most plants, or in general, like rooting with a heating mat with increased temperature tends to be better. So is like the cooler temps thing more for established plants, or how does that kind of play into propagation?
That's a great question. Yeah, I think for temperature wise, like when you root any plant or Hoya in particular, even the one that likes slightly lower temperature, like the polydura I was talking about, you still want to raise the temperature a little bit. So to answer your question more concisely, is temperature, the cooler or warmer temperature requirement it's related to more established plants. So for example, like I know Eve is successfully growing undulata, and that is one of the plants that it's like they have to be in the 80s, like to be happy for grow plants, right? So obviously when you're propagating it, you also want to keep it warm, right? But like Polylura, it does like maybe in the 60s, low 60, right? So but even when even with that, with that being said, when I'm propagating Polylura, I still put it on a heat mat, if that answers your question. The other one is imbrincata. I have to mention this every time when I talk about Hoya because that plant just hates me. It's also one of the plants that like a higher, maybe in the 80s and higher humidity for established plants. So meaning that when I'm trying to propagate it, I also have to make sure that the temperature is high. That's just how I do it. Yay.
Thank you.
Cynthia has a question. She asks, curious about growing Hoyas in sphagnum moss indefinitely. Is it a good idea or is it better to transition them? I've seen people grow them long-term in moss, but I wouldn't know how to water them.
Yeah, no, I think I answered this question before too, but this is such a great question. Like, if you could, I would recommend you to transition it into some other medium. But if you're like me, you're at a point that, oh my God, like the roots, it's growing out like just too much. It's impossible to remove all the moss. You can successfully grow Hoyas in sphagnum moss for extended period of time. Just basically like, like I told you, my Hoya serpent, like it's living here now. But same there is also right in terms of that you have to be really careful with watering. So it's just because I've been doing it for a couple of years now, I kind of know when it's too much or when it's not enough when I'm watering my plants, which go in sphagnum moss, which is about like at least 30-40% of them. But then, if you are a newer grower, and I would highly recommend you to like not leave your plant in sphagnum moss in the long term unless you are very comfortable with controlling the water level. So sometime, and if you must, like if you say, I don't know how to water, but it's too late, this plant is already grown into the sphagnum moss, then I would recommend default to underwatering a little bit instead of overwatering, because long fiber sphagnum moss just retains so much water that it will basically just rot your roots in no time. So yeah, that I would recommend. And if you can, I sometimes just take out the whole plant with the sphagnum moss, and then if I put too much water, I just kind of like gently squeeze the water out. You can do that too. Like the plant's not going to die because of that. So yeah, so that would be my answer, to that question.
That's awesome. I think you can see what she said. Thank you, Amanda.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. Well, I appreciate you guys are listening to me. So I think I talk about it in my YouTube channel too. It's like, why do you start your YouTube channel? It's because I noticed that even if there's no one around me, I'm still talk to myself. So I might as well just start a channel. And then it's great that you guys are here now. I'm actually talking to someone. So Thank you so much for asking the question. Yeah.
Anyone else have any questions? I actually, oh, okay. So Sen asked about rooting in pond and keeping the Hoya there. Do you reservoirs or just keep water like soil? I feel like I've killed a bunch in pond from either root rot or dry root because figuring out moisture, etc., can be a little challenging. So yeah.
I personally keep a small reservoir for ponds or lacquer. Ponds is, yeah, you're right. So I heard people have experience with ponds. It's rot the roots, and I think it's because people consider as like lacquer. So ponds actually, in comparison to lacquer, ponds retain a little bit more moisture than lacquer, just because of like it has different stuff like volcanic rocks or whatnot in there. So yeah, so my recommendation is I would, if I were you, I would, let me see if I can show you example. This is a very bad example, actually. So this is what you call like too much root. You probably have to report. But yeah, so I want to show you this because, like, for example, if I were you, and let's pretend, I know this is like, but let's pretend this is pond, I probably would just put no more than like 1 inch of reservoir or water in there. just so I know that, you know, there is still opportunity for the pen or for the pond to dry out. Yeah, it's difficult because when you wood in ponds, you don't want it to completely dry out because it will kill your leaves, but you also want to make sure that you don't put like way too much water. I see people, God, okay, they're growing into this place, sorry. I see people literally like put like water all the way up. And I think
Yeah,
this is
that's
what happened.
basically like keeping it in like a water.
In water,
propagation.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It's so I think that's probably why, you know, some people water their plants in pots. But I would say, yeah, like this guy, one inch, almost actually a little bit less than 1 inch would be okay, at least in my experience. So
I do want to share also, because I used to be so afraid of pond until my undulata. It was given to, I bought it in pond already, and I'm like,
Undulata.
I'm not going to touch this thing. And but it had already a reservoir cup in it. And then Angela, I would love for you to share, because basically Angela had suggested reservoir with a wick, because I'm
that's right.
an underwaterer and I will forget. And especially like Amanda said, pond will dry out and it's not good to dry out completely. So I want to give myself a couple of buffer, because like sphagnum moss, I would love for my Hoya serpents and things like that to be in sphagnum, but one day it looks moist and then the next day already it's
Like,
super
bone
dry
dry.
and brittle, and I'm like, oh no, I've basically killed this plant. So pond with a wick gives you that extra buffer of a day or two where you're like, okay, I better water it now. I see it visibly.
Yeah.
And it also gives it that added space to put a little bit more water, so that like where Amanda was showing you like an inch, and then if you imagine putting a wick in there, it more water is going to go up the roots, closer to the roots, because that's where you would wick it up to like halfway up the pot. Angela, if you have any other suggestions or wanted to add to pond, because Angela roots and grows everything in pond now, I think.
Oh, nice.
That's where I got my little tricks from. So
You're
oh,
on
you're
mute.
still mute.
You're muted. There you go.
Hi. I actually briefly talked about this at the Bay Area Hoya event, but I didn't have an example to show everyone. So this is kind of how I grow my Hoyas now. Is
Oh,
there's
awesome.
an
Yeah.
inner cup that sits on top of the outer cup, and then this is the wick in the reservoir. And so basically the wick just takes, the roots will take up whatever it needs from the reservoir and never too much. So it never really is overwatered, because as long as the reservoir is below the level of the inner cup, the pond is never like sitting in the water. And all my Hoyas are thriving this way. The only thing is, even though pond has nutrients, like it has like the little osmocote like nutrient pellets, I still use the hydroponics, like the general hydroponics 3-step system to put in the reservoir, just to kind of give it.
Yeah.
Like,
And so how long does that take for you until you need to water it again? Like, yeah, how often do you water your plants now?
My Hoyas are in my cabinet. And this amount of reservoir, which is essentially double, like the same amount of size as, you know, the pot itself, I probably won't need to water it for like 3-4 weeks in my cabinet. But if it were outside, probably 2 weeks or maybe
That's
3
awesome.
weeks.
Yeah.
And I don't fill the reservoir until it gets like really low. So
right.
And then I will know exactly when I need to water and exactly how much to water. So there's no guessing, because I know a lot of people have a hard time sort of figuring out when is the right time to water. Like, you know, how dry should the pond be, you know, before they water. And
Do you just fill the reservoir, or do you water from the top? You just bottom water.
I only fill the reservoir. When
Got it.
I am rooting, however, let's say these are fresh cuttings with no roots, I would water from the top.
Makes
and
sense.
then from there on, even though it's rooting, I would only fill the reservoir. So only when it's a fresh cutting and the pond is dry that I water from the top. Otherwise, I never water from the top.
Okay, awesome. So Sen had a clarifying question. When you have a reservoir without a wick, at what point do you water it again? Do you water till it's completely gone, or do you not let it dry out completely
So
without a wick?
without a wick, I killed some plants when I had this in pond and without a wick. But a good way is to just kind of move your pond around. And, pond changes color when it's dry versus when it's wet. So usually even at the top, if it's dry, it'll look more white. So I would kind of take my finger, kind of move the pond around and see if just like below the white, like how far down does it go before like you see that it's a different color. But
it's almost like feeling for soil and seeing
yeah,
how much moisture. Yeah.
But like most of the time, like if and then I would just like take a piece of pond and I kind of roll it around in my fingers. And if there's like any amount of moisture, I would wait to water.
So
Yeah.
do you wait to it like, so do you wait for all the ponds to like completely dry out? So you mentioned that, okay, I'm gonna take the bottom one to see like if there's any moisture. So are you saying that like you're gonna wait for all the ponds to like just dry out before you water the reservoir again?
So it's kind of tricky because I like my pond in clear pots so that I can see exactly what it looks like. If it's in clear pots, then you might be able to see exactly where your dryness level is.
Yeah. And you can even see right now that there is some condensation too. So it's like, oh, perfect. There's still moisture in there.
Yes.
Yeah.
So that's why. But the only downside is there's algae growth when it's clear. But then you can also put a cash pot where
to cover from the light.
Cup like that's not see through.
And just fun fact, people ask about algae all the time. It is caused by your light, your light source. Too much light, there will be algae growth. They love light. So that's why, as much as clear is great for visually looking at your plants to see if it needs water, covering it up will help with the algae growth. But Amanda, what did you say you flush it with to flush it out?
So algae is fine as long as it's not too much. But like if it's really bother you, if it's get too much, you can always use Faisan.
Faisan.
So it's Faisan is it's great. Like I use, first of all, it's chemical. So if you don't use chemicals in your household, you may not want to use that. But Faisan is basically algicide, like it kill algae, bacteria, virus, and fungus. So if like Angela's setting is like more like a hydroponic, like semi-hydro, I guess, you can always like add the Faisan in the water, and then it will help to kill the algae if you have any problem with that. And I think someone actually asked the material of the wick.
Yeah. I would recommend cotton because it is super absorbent. Anything that's like the brown rope for brown paper bags, that's very thin and brittle, that won't absorb moisture as much. So yeah, at least 1 inch thickness of cotton. That's what I use. I just get it from Amazon. There's a bunch. You just cut. Yeah. But as long as it's cotton.
So I guess I think this question is from Hygiene. I'm sorry. But anyway, there's a question. So question was okay, if you don't have a wake, do you let the reservoir to deplete completely before watering again? So
yeah, that's what.
Yeah. Okay. I guess that's
Yeah, that's what Angela was. We were talking about.
So I'm gonna say no. I'm gonna say because when the reservoir completely dries, then then the top of your pond would be like too dry. Then the roots that are here will be too dry. So I'm gonna say, you know, when it gets to be like halfway, then you can water it again.
So more looking at the pond itself instead of the reservoir, it's what you're saying.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. Yeah.
If it's without a wig, that is.
Yeah. Awesome. Cool.
Anyone have any Leica questions? I'm mostly Leica. I've tried to go as inorganic as possible, but I like Leica for the same reason I'm starting to like pond, because I'm an underwater. I need a visual cue that I need to water my plants, and that's the easiest way to do so. It's like, oh, there's no more water. I need to put more water, and I find that they last, at least in my growing environment. I'm able to water at least a week and a half to every 2 weeks as well. So that really helps, especially with, you know, all of our schedules, very busy. If we can lengthen the amount of watering time, I'm sure it'll help everyone. But yeah, that's if there's no other questions, I was going to talk about the contest. We want to promote and encourage propagation and make you guys feel more confident in your propagation skills. So we're going to host a contest. So you've already done the first part, attending this workshop. I've got your names down, so I know who you are. The next thing is I will post an event page, and that is where every week on either Saturday or Sunday for the next 4 weeks, you're going to pick a cutting that you want to try to propagate in any medium that you think is best with it. Amanda will be your guide. She is only available though on the weekends right now. So feel free to post there, but just know that she probably won't answer it until the weekend. And then the 5th picture will be of a picture of your rooted cutting. And so everybody who can successfully root a cutting, I encourage you to root as many, obviously, so you have more success, will get a chance. What did we say, Amanda? Like, so the admins have some uncommon Hoyas, and we will surprise the winner with 1 or 2 uncommon Hoya cuttings. So anyone have any questions? If you don't want to join, but let me know too. I will take you off the list. But
it's more, it's not so much of a question, but like a comment, like, you know, if it's nice enough that like, oh, you know, post on there, Amanda will like give you the answer. And I want to encourage like everyone, you know, if you have best practices or like if you have like some tips that you want to share with everyone in the group, I think that's fine as well. Yeah, I think that would be great actually. So
yeah, cool. Okay. Yeah, I'm debating if it would be better, instead of an event page that everyone posts, because that's private unless someone's following the event, maybe we should just post to the group, so then everyone can see how well like the propagation is, and then they might have questions as well. I mean, obviously they could have answered here, but yeah, so that would be something that we can do. So I'll do that. I'll just post like, you know, week 1 propagations, post here kind of thing. So yeah, any questions about the contest, about propagation, Hoya conservation?
Yeah, I highly recommend you guys check our, you know, Del Commonberg, like Dan Green and Dorothy Green, if you haven't already, their website, or also the International Hoya Association website. You know, they have really good information. Like again, like I said, you know, there's like a large scale of conservation efforts for Hoyas per se, but then like all the different individuals, you know, they have done amazing work, you know, in terms of, you know, collecting the Hoyas and keeping people informed, like what is, you know, what is in danger, and you know, what can we do as hobbyists or like collectors. So yeah, so check out the website. I think those will, you know, definitely help with, you know, along your Hoya collection journey.
Yeah, I agree. I find a lot of Hoya origins from Doug Chamberlain. Every time I Google it, that's the first thing that comes up anyway. VermontHoyas.com, if you don't know. But yeah, cool. Well, thank you, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course, I will feel free, probably in the next day or so, you'll see the first post on Hoya propagation.
Thank you
Awesome.
so much.
Have a good weekend.
Thank
Bye.
you. See you guys next time. Bye.